Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. The Commission on the Prevention of Weapons of Mass Destruction, Proliferation, and Terrorism, commonly known as the Graham-Talent WMD Commission, was established because of a key recommendation found in the 9/11 Commission report. The WMD Commission was established by House Resolution 1, Section 1851, to assess within 180 days any and all of the nation's activities, initiatives, and programs to prevent weapons of mass destruction, proliferation, and terrorism. That report was delivered to the President and to Congress on December 2nd, 2008. With us today is former United States Senator Jim Talent, Vice Chairman of the WMD Commission. Since today's subject is so broad, Senator Talent has agreed to have this dialogue in two 30-minute discussions. In Part 1, we focus on the prevention of bioterrorism. In Part 2, we'll be focusing on the prevention of nuclear terrorism. This part will be a discussion about how to prevent, stop, and counter the spread of nuclear weapons, capabilities, and the related components, materials, technology to terrorists and states of concern. We're very pleased Senator Talent has made himself available to have this dialogue. Jim Talent, welcome to the conversation again.
Thank you, Lee.
In our first discussion, we were talking about bioterrorism, but we were going to, we missed some stuff, and so we're at the top here, we're going to talk a little bit about it. You had the subject, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think it's useful to understanding both bio and nuclear to think of the difference between the two of them as threats, okay? One of the reasons that our commission was actually more concerned about bio, although both are a danger, no question, is that it is easier to weaponize a bio weapon, so it's less expensive. To get a nuclear weapon, you have to get enough enriched uranium or nuclear material, and that still requires the power of a nation state to do. Now, a terrorist could get it from a nation state, you know, given or steal it or something. A bioweapon can be isolated much more easily. It's easier to stockpile a bioweapon, again, because you don't need the nuclear, you just need, so once you isolate a pathogen, you can stockpile, and then it's easier to what we call, what in the field they call reload, which is to hit a city twice in a row, say 2 weeks apart. You can't really do that with a nuclear. It's much more difficult transporting the material and accumulating enough to make two devices like that. So
it has a signature too. I mean,
exactly.
there are detectors that will find.
You make another point. Deterrence is easier in the nuclear field because we are further along in the field of attribution. It's easier to know who placed or launched the nuclear device. It's not a simple thing, but it's easier than it is in the bio area. So for all these reasons, you know, we're concerned because it's logical. We know the terrorists want to do it. It's logical for them to do it in terms of their crazy goals. I mean, and you know, you have to assume that if something serves the goals and objectives of people and they know about it and that they're trying to get it, that there's a danger that they will in fact get it. And it's really kind of wishful thinking to just put our heads in the sand and pretend that this isn't out there.
Well, like we said in Part 1, it's pure luck and some of their ineptitude and incompetence. I mean, like, look at the I forget how long ago it was now, but not that long ago, there was a guy that pulled a van up into Times Square. Yeah. And he was just inept. It didn't go off. Yes. Thank God it didn't go off. Had it, there would have been a whole lot of people who were killed, but he was just inept.
It is interesting. We know a lot of, first of all, I should say, as I said in the last segment, there's thousands of people in the government working very hard and doing a lot. I mean, we think we've made a lot of progress in the intelligence area. So just finding out who the bad guys are and stopping them before they can do anything. But the effort specifically directed at preventing or responding in a robust way to a bio attack, we have been lagging behind. We should make that clear. But it is interesting how many of these attacks are foiled at the point of attack by people in the area who see it, like the last New York attempt by the guy who saw the man there with the car and called over the police.
And there was some like smoke or something coming out.
And he noticed it and he did something about it. And So, I mean, that's, again, citizen involvement, which we also talked about the last time, is very important. So, when you look at nuclear, and it is a threat, and we have to deal with it, no question about it, it's a different, because the nature of the material that you're dealing with and the weapon, it calls for a somewhat different set of responses, and our report reflects that.
Right. Now, you were talking right here initially about how hard it is to get what you need to put into the nuclear weapon itself to make it go off. This highly enriched uranium is what it is. The very thing that the Iranians are working on right now.
Exactly.
Right? Okay. So starting back here in a place called Palindaba, South Africa. Apparently South Africa at one time had a nuclear program. And in their nuclear program they were a nation state. They were able to create highly enriched uranium, which they had in storage in something that they thought was a pretty secure area. And then they got out of the nuclear business and they got rid of the weapons, but they still had the highly enriched uranium.
Right.
So then what happens? Two teams decide to show up and break in. Now, for whatever reason, it was really weird when I read this, they didn't take any of the uranium. They just went in there and attacked and shot people up and then left. The second team, of course, was stopped, because the security had been alerted. But the first team didn't do anything like grab the uranium and run. But had they
would have gotten the,
they would have had what they needed.
There's a connection. The reason why the commission was called Proliferation and Terrorism was largely on the nuclear side of it, because there's a connection between nuclear proliferation and the danger of nuclear terrorism, and it's this. I mean, ever since the creation of nuclear weapons, the international community has put in place what they call, again, it's called a non-proliferation regime. It's a set of agreements and organizations that are designed to limit the number of countries, nation states, that get nuclear weapons. And it's a complex set of agreements and assurances also, because one of the reasons more countries don't get nuclear weapons is that they believe that they don't need them to defend themselves because the existing international arrangement is stable enough that they're not going to be attacked. A lot of countries live under the umbrella of America's nuclear deterrent and American power in this sense, okay? Well, the problem is that regime is breaking down. It was effective for a number of years, but we are seeing now the beginning, or the danger is the beginning of a nuclear cascade, where more and more nation states get nuclear weapons. The North Koreans did it in the 90s. Pakistan did it before then, and Pakistan, as you know, has a substantial and growing nuclear arsenal. And is in danger of being a failed state. Okay, it's not a failing state, but it's close. It shows some of the signs of it. North Korea, and now the Iranians are trying to get it also. Well, the reason it's called a cascade, or the danger of a cascade, is as more and more countries get this, other countries may feel like they have to develop them also in order to protect themselves. I mean, the Japanese, as an example, and one can't blame them, are concerned about the North Koreans. If they begin to doubt America's commitment to defend them or ability to defend them, there's a danger they may. So then you get a cascade. And the more of this material you have under the control of governments, some of which are not all that stable, the greater danger that a bomb or material will be given to terrorists, or they'll steal it. And obviously Iran is the chief state sponsor of terrorism around them, and the State Department's declared them that. So if they get a nuclear weapon, who are they going to give it to?
Hezbollah.
Yeah, well, that's the danger. And even if they don't actually give it, the fact that they might is a form of leverage that they can use to reinforce their conventional aggression. So this is tremendously dangerous, and we need to take effective measures against it.
Well, part of what I read was that there is in the world X number of grams or kilograms of highly enriched uranium, and that 95% of all this is in the United States and in Russia. And so we're talking about, assuming, of course, that the Russians aren't letting any of theirs out, because I know we're not letting any of ours out, right, that we're just talking about this 5% that's still floating around. But it only takes a couple of kilograms of highly enriched uranium in order to create a nuclear weapon, right?
And those figures are tossed out there. I mean, there's a limit to how certain you can be. I mean, as the AQ-Con network showed.
Well, yeah, I was going to get into that.
And you know, this stuff is out there, and we're not certain how much is out there. Now, again, you get into classified stuff pretty quickly here too.
Right.
We have made progress in recent years in locking down the material we know about, particularly between us and the Russians. So, I mean, that's good.
Now, we've spent a ton of money, haven't we? After the '91 collapse, not only did we go in there to clean up their bio-terrorism system, we also had a deal where we paid a lot of money for, was it Kazakhstan, and I forget, there was 3 or 4 of their states that had nuclear weapons that they gave it up after the breakup.
And we assisted them in locking down the materials and making sure that they were safe, which was in our interest to do. I mean, that was
very
protection
much so.
of America's security. So,
yes.
I mean, that's a policy that's been supported by consensus and has, to a substantial degree, worked. I mean, it's by no means perfect. But here the danger is that this cascade, I mean, Pakistan's an example. I mean, we called it in the report an epicenter of a lot of our concerns, because obviously there's a lot of terror. Well, there are terrorist connections in Pakistan. A lot of people get radicalized in Pakistan. The government is neither completely stable, and there are different elements within the government. So we don't know how much it's been penetrated, for example, by the terrorists, and its lines of authority are hard to figure. And it has a very substantial nuclear arsenal. And a growing one.
I think they have, your report said at that time they had 85 working nuclear devices.
And they're going to have over 100 soon if they don't already, and the fastest growing nuclear arsenals in the world really are in Pakistan and India. There's a nation state aspect to this, even apart from the terrorists, that people ought to be aware of. I'm connected to the Heritage Foundation, as you know. I'm a fellow there, and they've gamed this out. I mean, you can run games. It's not a game. I mean, it's scenarios for planning purposes. When you get a bilateral nuclear confrontation is bad enough. Think of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But that was between 2 countries that had stable governments, that had stable launch protocols, and that talked to each other. And we had the hotline, right? So, I mean, President Kennedy could pick up the phone and call Khrushchev. Now, what if you get a multilateral confrontation between nations that maybe they're not all that stable, they don't have as clear launch protocols, and they don't talk to each other? So, I mean, China, India, Pakistan, and Iran. The possibility of a launch, either an impulsive or an accidental launch or a decision to launch, grows geometrically under those circumstances. It's one of the reasons, and we didn't get into this in the report because we just didn't cover it, but missile defense is so important for that reason. It's just, I mean, there's a whole host of reasons why we need an effective multi-layered missile defense system.
Which is something that all of a sudden has come back to discussion.
Yeah.
Of course, people are seeing this much later. Right now, this is March the 27th, 2012, but they'll be seeing this a month or more from now, unless they're watching on YouTube, where they might see it earlier. But nevertheless, the President of the United States has just indicated that we're going to talk to the Russians about what we're planning to do with our missile deterrence.
Well, he's
Do you have any idea what it is that the United States plans might be?
It doesn't bode well. I mean, you got to look at this with some history. Missile defense was started in the 1980s in the Cold War era. And there's a number of people on the left of the center who were concerned that if we developed an effective missile defense, it would destabilize our bilateral relationship with the Russians, because it would call into doubt their retaliatory capacity, and then they would build more missiles. This was the concern they had. Now, I have to say, I understand that concern. History has proven that it was wrong, because the Russians came to the table to discuss nuclear limitations in response to the missile defense system. And that's a historical record. I understood it anyway in that context. I didn't agree with it, and I think it was wrong. But in today's world, when the danger is a small launch by a rogue or failing state, there is simply no reason I can think of not to support a multi-layered ballistic missile defense system. Right. It's an entirely non-nuclear system, as you know, and purely defensive. Its only purpose is to shoot down ballistic missiles. Now, why is that bad? And yet the Obama administration...
people in Seattle would like that kind of protection from North Korea, or maybe the people in Anchorage, or in Canada.
Yeah, we have to understand that at the same time as the North Koreans have nuclear weapons, and the Iranians are trying to get it, they're also advancing their programs of nuclear missiles as delivery systems, so they can get secure intercontinental capabilities. So, and they already have medium-range capabilities. So, this is a real concern. And if we can, and we have the technology, it's one of the rare instances where we have a technological answer to a strategic problem. There's simply no reason not to build it, and yet the administration has cut missile defense. They gave away the missile defense bases in Eastern Europe. They linked the New START treaty to missile defense, which was a mistake. And now the president, as we have this conversation, it's on the heels of his comment to President Medvedev that he would have more flexibility on missile defense after the election, and you don't know what he's planning to concede in that area.
So coming back to the kind of things that your commission are talking about, the WMDs nuclear that you're concerned about aren't really going to come by missile, though, are they? They're probably going to come on a boat, over land. Somehow they're going to enter the United States illicitly or be off our shore.
The classic suitcase bomb. It's a non-missile delivery system is much more likely when you're dealing with terrorists, although you've got to understand a ballistic missile defense, a ballistic missile can cover everything from an ICBM to a short-range thing that you can launch off a cargo ship. I mean, it is a concern that they could get a platform just offshore and a short-range missile and launch it. Yeah, exactly. So it is certainly relevant to that threat, but it's in the context of the terrorism that you would see the suitcase bomb or you would see the nuclear device planted someplace. And so it's important to take steps to prevent that. Again, the advantage with nuclear is you have the jugular vein of getting a nuclear weapon is getting the enriched material. So if you press your thumb down on that, you choke it off.
Well, that brings us to the case of Leonid Smirnov, who worked, this is in the period after the Soviet Union had fallen. He worked in a laboratory, and he was one of these guys that was counting this stuff out. And for some reason, their systems were so weak that they allowed for a 3% discrepancy.
Yeah.
I guess their scales just wouldn't measure it close enough. And he managed to collect personally in a little lead box 1,588 grams of highly enriched uranium that he didn't know what to do with. He wanted to sell it, but luckily he hooked up with some idiots who then drove him and got him involved with the police, and the police says, "What's in the lead box?" And he says, "Oh, well, uranium."
Right.
And they ran out the door.
Right.
And he got a lighter sentence because he was helpful in dealing with this. But nevertheless, 1,588 grams is enough for something.
Right.
So, I mean, this highly enriched uranium, you're right, it needs to be locked down. Senator Nunn was very, very...
The Nunn-Lugar bill was, and is today, a leader in this area. It's to stop these things, and one of the difficult things about it, we talked a little bit about in the last segment, it's always a chain of things that you have to do. Now again, in nuclear, it's the link of stopping the nuclear material is a very important link. But even doing that requires that you do a number of things. So part of it is work with governments that are willing to work with you to lock down the material that you know they have. Part of it is very vigorous and aggressive intelligence collection. I mean, there's a point I make to people is in the post-Cold War world, when the major threats to our homeland are asymmetric in nature. An asymmetric weapon is a weapon that has a far greater destructive impact than the power it takes to develop and launch it. Intelligence becomes probably the most important and comprehensively effective tool that we have. And I really think we have done a poor job, this is on a bipartisan basis since 9/11, is in telling people about the strategic situation we're in and how we have to adapt as a country to be able to deal with it. We all have to accept the idea that intelligence collection and gathering and effective responses is absolutely necessary to protect this country. I mean, people can think of it in terms of police activity if you want. I mean, it's fine, except that the criminals you're trying to get are criminals who might very well have weapons of mass destruction. So it's very high stakes. And just as you would not deprive the police of, you know, the legitimate tools that they need to catch people committing serious crimes, you have to allow the intelligence community the ability to, you know, capture suspects and vigorously interrogate them. Now, we can and should put limits, and they should be enforced with accountability. But we have to get this intel. I mean, really, the safety of America depends on it, and that's a key thing. We talked some about that, but there are other things as well. I mean, we haven't talked about when we talked about the nuclear, the regulatory and international authorities, the IAEA, that regulates and inspects other countries. There are changes that need to happen there. I mean, there's a lot of things that we need to do in this area.
When we grew up, the Soviet Union was our big enemy, and the big weapon that they had was nuclear weapons. Then it collapsed. They were broke. Then the oil economy changed that. They're not so broke anymore.
Right.
Are the Russians still friendly to the United States? Or should we be worrying again about a country that still has, what is it, like 1,700 to 2,000 active nuclear weapons?
I think you have to say that they're not friendly to the United States anymore. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean they're an enemy, okay?
Right.
But it does mean that they have identified definite goals that they want to accomplish, which they understand are not consistent with the things we have identified as important to American security. And so they make mischief in a lot of places. I mean, for example, the Russians, if there's one reason why we haven't been able to organize the international community as effectively as we would like to deal with Iran, it's been obstructionism by the Russians, who won't, you know, who stonewalled effective sanctions and are still doing that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. A part of it is just to shift our focus away from what they would like to do in the former states of the Soviet Union and in Eastern Europe.
Well, so why is it that the Russians don't seem to understand that between the United States and them, that we've got most of the highly enriched uranium? And by allowing the Iranians to get involved, all of a sudden that's the amount in the world starts to go up. I mean, the Iranians are not past handing this to the Chechens.
Right. Look, I think it's this, and you know, you'd have to either get into classified stuff or
which we're not going to do here.
Or get Putin on this program and get him talking, and then you can find out the real reasons. Yeah. But I think a lot of it is just that they understand that they want to occupy the United States and its allies in focusing on these kinds of issues, like Iran. The whole Syrian issue, they're also blocking the international community from doing anything there.
China too, though.
Exactly. Yeah, China's in that sense, the two of them work together a fair amount, and it keeps us from focusing on issues like the fact that they invaded Georgia, 3 years ago, their neighbor, and haven't left. I mean, that they may want to be reassembling the empire. I mean, it's well known that Putin thinks that the fall of the Soviet Empire was a terrible thing. I mean,
well, Senator, I have to say this. In reading a report which was written in 2008, before the United States really began to fall in its economic position, there were a lot of assertions there. We need to do this. We need to do that. We want to organize. We want to use the bully pulpit of the United States to accomplish certain good things throughout the world. And reading that in 2012, I'm going like, wow, we just don't have that same oomph anymore at the time when that report was written. I don't think the Russians fear us. The Chinese certainly don't fear us. And apparently the Iranians don't fear us.
I think we followed up. I'm not wearing my hat as a commission vice chairman now. I think we followed a policy of weakness in a lot of areas. And that's the reason. I mean, we've allowed our military capabilities to atrophy. We've allowed the debt to grow to the point where, you know, obviously our financial situation is much shakier. We've appeased people who are, if not our enemies, at least our aggressive competitors, like the Russians. And President Obama wanted to reset the relationship with the Russians, so he just gave them the missile defense bases in Eastern Europe and didn't get anything in return for it. And they interpreted that as simply weakness, which is, you know, what I would have thought. they would have interpreted it as. Same thing in dealing with Iran. He didn't protest about their rigged elections, et cetera. And this just sent the message over and over again that the United States leadership is weak. And we're seeing this, the response you would expect from Russia and the Chinese and the Iranians. Now we can recover from this following a policy of, I'm a big believer in what Teddy Roosevelt said, you know, you walk softly, you're not provocative, you're respectful, you carry a big stick, and the stick defined as capabilities that everybody knows are effective in protecting the interests that are vital to your security. And that's, you know, that doesn't mean you're using them all the time. You know, the object of being strong is not to win wars, it's to prevent wars, primarily.
Right.
And you know, when Reagan was president, we didn't have it. I mean, look, we had Grenada. That was basically it, right?
Right.
Which wasn't much of a, because we were strong. And so people don't test us when you're strong. And I think that's what we need to get back to.
We got about 2-3 minutes left in this segment. Is there anything here that you wanted to cover that we haven't covered yet? Now's the time.
I could reemphasize what I said in the last segment and repeat here, that Congress has been very unhelpful in these areas, dealing with both bio and nuclear, by the fact that they continue to oversee this area of executive branch activity through several dozen committees and subcommittees. I guess it's probably boring to your listeners, but it's really important. I mean, the Congress get its act together, concentrate its oversight capabilities on one or two experts committees, and then play a constructive role over time.
What you're saying is that there is a culture of personality rather than of purpose.
Yeah, that's a very good way of putting it, so that they're each more worried about their little piece of turf than they are about contributing to the overall effort. And then I just say to people, we need to be conscious of this threat of bioterrorism and nuclear terrorism. It is there, it's serious, but we can deal with it. We don't need to panic. You know, you have to confront the truth, even unpleasant ones, in order to be able to deal with them. And when you do, you can be effective, and I think we can in the future. But there are areas we need to do things that we're not doing now.
And what things should we be doing even now? I mean, apparently people are just sitting waiting for an election to occur so that then we can get on with stuff.
Right.
But there's the business. I mean, we got like 30 seconds. Is there anything that we should be doing in this next 6 months?
I would say two things, and the first is not a commission recommendation, so this is just Jim Talent. I see no reason not to complete and deploy as soon as possible a multi-layered effective ballistic missile defense system, okay? Again, it's a non-nuclear, entirely defensive system. Only purpose is to shoot down nuclear missiles. Why don't we want that as soon as we can get it? We protect other countries as well as the United States. The second is in the bio area. We need to work on the chain of resiliency. We need to have a stronger and more effective set of responses to a bio attack.
Very good. I hope that somebody is out there listening, because we are America and we don't want to be hit. Senator Talent, thank you so much for coming and spending this 2.5 hours with us. I certainly appreciate it.
Thank you, Lee.
And to my audience, I've been speaking with former Senator Jim Talent about weapons of mass destruction and a report which was delivered to Congress and the President in 2008. I hope they were listening. See you next week.